From bureaucracy's basement to your ears, this is the weekly meeting of the Queen City Improvement Bureau. Each week, the dedicated staff of the Bureau meet to file reports, make recommendations, and survive on the water that drips from the boiler pipes into our open mouths as we sleep on a bed of dot matrix printer paper. One day, maybe we'll escape from the subterranean hell that is this subbasement, but until that day comes, this city isn't going to improve itself. So here we stay, improving things. This meeting is now in session. Greetings. As you can probably guess from the fact that I'm doing the intro, my colleague Aidan is not going to make our meeting tonight. He was felled by a mystery illness that has left him with a difficulty. After weeks of coughing, he can no longer speak. But when he tries, it just comes out as croaking. And oddly enough, we've discovered that when he croaks, it's in the language of ravens and crows. So, we've recognized this at the Bureau as not a disability, but rather an opportunity, a superpower, if you will. As you may have heard, upstairs, they've decided to end the city's contract with the company that has been running the composting facility at the landfill and are going to be issuing an RFP to find a new location for the facility. And they're also going to find a new company to run it. So until that time, and they've got the RFP fulfilled, city staff are going to be running the composting at the existing site. But waste management staff are overworked, and the composting facility is too small to handle all of the gross kitchen garbage you guys keep sending out there. So Aidan has volunteered to heroically spend the last few days on the edge of town using his superpower to speak with the Regina and Region Corvid community. We're hoping he can negotiate a waste access agreement with the area crows and ravens. How this is going to work is we're going to give them unfettered access to our waste, and they can eat as much of it as they want, and that'll help keep the amount of excess compost to a minimum. And in return, they're going to gift us shiny trinkets, lost jewelry, and nickels and stuff. Should be a win-win for everybody, and Aidan says that negotiations are going very well. The only last sticking point that they're sticking on right now is that as the crows and ravens are effectively going to become city employees, at this point they're sort of grappling with what their benefit package is going to look like. Aidan says that they are very skilled negotiators, like scarily skilled, and that they're insisting on a deluxe dental package despite the fact that they don't have teeth. So, at least I think that's what he's telling me, because his phone message just sounds like croaking to me, so I had to kind of fill in the gaps. Hopefully he'll be back next week with a report on the Regina Crows and Ravens Gross Garbage Joint Use Agreement. But until that time, it's just me here in the Bureau. So that is going to make attendance really easy to do. Paul DeShane, I'm present. And we actually have a guest with us tonight. We have Professor Vanessa Matthews here. Hey, Vanessa.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks a lot for coming down. I was getting really lonely.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, it's been a while. We haven't done a meeting since 2024. It is now 2025.
Wow.
And I haven't spoken to you since we had a municipal election. So, what were your thoughts? I know you're a council watcher. How do you feeling optimistic or pessimistic or what?
I always go into these changes very hopeful. I think that these are wonderful opportunities to kind of think about how far we've come over the past 4 years, and to think about some progress that we can make on a number of fronts.
Yeah.
And there's some exciting things that are coming forward that I hope will kind of allow us to become a more livable city, allow us to kind of hit some of the goals that we have created with our policies and plans. And so with this new council, I'm hoping that we can achieve all of those great things.
Yeah. Did all the councillors you want to get elected?
Most of them.
Most of them? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I don't know, I was completely stunned by Chad Buczynski's win.
I was too.
Yeah, who were you thinking?
I wasn't quite sure, actually. I wasn't confident enough to kind of put forward any kind of guess as to who would take it, but for some reason I was still quite surprised that he won, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he's going to be able to do.
Yeah, same. I I really thought it was going to be Lori Brashani. I really thought that, that you'd have the people who wanted change would split the vote with all the new people, and then the masters would get all of the sort of like establishment voters. Mm-hmm. But then the people who were looking for somebody who was change, but also, a known quantity would go with Brashani, and she would just run up the middle and take it. And so, yeah, I was staggered mm-hmm. at the outcome. And I think so is Chad.
Yes.
But so far it's been, they haven't actually had a real meeting, so.
No.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, gosh. Okay, so that is next week is going to be the first, I think it's the 22nd and 23rd is the Planning Commission, and then the first real Executive Committee. Mm-hmm. And then the following weekend after that, or week after that, the following Wednesday, the 30th, would be the first real council meeting where they're dealing with, like, decision points, right? Like where, like their first council meeting, everything was kind of decided beforehand. This one's going to be for reals. And so that's why I wanted to have you in. Because there's some stuff held over from the last council that's actually going to wind up on this new council's agenda that I found pretty interesting. So, and I thought you might too. Mm-hmm. So the first one that I wanted to talk to you about, because it's my favorite, is the nuisance and underutilized properties motion, which came from former councillor Andrew Stevens from Ward 3, who's been replaced by David Froh. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to run through the be it resolves from the end of the motion. So he was looking for a report in the first quarter of this year that would look into the creation of a property subclass for standalone surface parking lots in established intensification incentive boundaries with a focus on warehouse, downtown, Centre Square. He also wants to look at where surface parking lots are owned by the City of Regina, that they would put together plans to transition these into properties with residential or commercial uses. The establishment of bylaws for enforcement to deal with nuisance properties. And, there'd also be a special subclass for nuisance and abandoned properties. And, and then wherever administration is already working on stuff like this to just incorporate his motion into that. So, this seemed like a substantial motion. It's a pity he didn't get to be there to read it into the record. But what did you think?
I'm so excited for this to get some airtime.
Yeah.
This is a really important motion. I think that it takes account of a lot of the land that we have in our city center, in the surrounding kind of areas that is just not being used to its full potential right now. So we have tons of like vacant lots, we have surface parking lots, we have, vacant buildings, and like all of these spaces just could be so much more. And you think of our downtown, and I think of our downtown all the time, and I'm thinking of all these like parking spots, right? It's like we have close to 50% of our downtown is parking, and it's like this is a motion that's actually about putting things into practice. It's an action motion. It's saying, what can we do with our parking lots that will make it so that they're not as desirable to keep in that land use. It's looking at how do we try to tackle the properties that have become like problem areas. And try to create greater safety around those, which I also think is like hugely important. So I look at this motion, and it's exciting because it fits with everything else that we've been doing. It's like it makes perfect sense. It fits with the housing accelerator kind of fund changes that we've made to create greater density and intensification. It fits with the energy and sustainability framework. It fits with everything that has been, kind of trucking along for the last number of years. And so this type of motion, I think, just puts everything together.
Yeah. But parking. We need parking, Vanessa.
Do we though? Do we really? It's interesting, right? So it always becomes this chicken and egg kind of thing. It's, people want to go to the downtown, and then they complain that there's nothing in the downtown. But then half of our downtown is parking.
Yeah.
But then we have other people that are complaining that there's not enough parking. But part of the reason that we can't have stronger public transit is because we don't have enough people. So it becomes this scenario where we really need to start changing over some of this land into other uses, and that will inspire more people to live in the downtown. It will kind of create the density that's required for public transit. It will have all of these spin-off kind of functions.
Yeah. It's almost too bad that it's taken so long. Because, the downtown plan was passed, I think it was in 2009. Mm-hmm. And it did actually, the first draft of the 2009 version actually had this in there. It suggested some kind of fee. Mm-hmm. And then so administration put that out, their draft plan, and then there was like a round of consultations, and it came back after the consultation taking that out and saying they were going to use a carrots approach as opposed to a stick approach to downtown parking lots. And look how well that worked out, right?
Yeah, not very well.
No.
It's interesting. We have these parking lots that have these impervious surfaces, right?
Yeah.
And what happens with those as well is that we have runoff that brings a lot of pollution, and that goes into our stormwater, and the people who own the parking lots aren't really paying for the costs of dealing with that either. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
I think, when we're looking at the costs of having parking lots, then I think there's a number of different factors that we have to kind of take into account. We have to think about the environmental costs of having those. We have to think about the lack of other uses that is coming from that, the lack of sense of place, and that isn't figuring into the tax that parking lots are currently paying.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important one to actually start to address some of the equity around, like, who does have to pay for some of the problems that are associated with having so much of these underutilized spaces in our core.
Yeah. So could you talk about some of the environmental costs that come from parking lots? You mentioned the water runoff, which the city has to deal with through its waste management system, or its wastewater system. Like, what are some of the other problems that surface lots create?
Yeah, I think that they tend to kind of not support transit. As I had mentioned, like it becomes then that you don't have the density that you are requiring. Yeah. And so that is forcing people into private vehicle use. And that's principally how we move around in the city, is through that kind of form. And so we end up then having the environmental costs of people using their private vehicles more, and the costs in general and on the environment of those aspects, and it just creates an unhealthy kind of system.
Yeah. And then, like, asphalt and concrete are themselves carbon intensive things.
Absolutely.
It adds to, like, the heat island effect that you have in cities. Animals don't dig them.
No.
Right?
No.
So they eat up whatever, habitat we'd have for, like, plants and animals in our town.
Definitely.
And our humans. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we charge them the lowest tax rate.
Yes.
Right? Like, that's madness.
It is, because they're not paying for the costs that they're incurring, right? Yeah. And if we think about it from a social cost, from an economic cost, from an environmental cost, they're not really paying for that at all. Yeah. And so I think there is a need to try to kind of shift the fee structure, or the taxes that are associated with that, just to try to rebalance that a little bit.
Yeah. We're on 91.3 FM CJTR Regina Community Radio. We're the Queen City Improvement Bureau. I'm solo hosting tonight with Vanessa Matthews from the University of Regina. We're talking about what's coming up at City Council in a couple of weeks. Andrew Stevens, in his motion, he mentioned the fact that other cities have tried this, and he pointed out Edmonton. I did a Google search on the internet, and maybe you've heard of it.
I think I have.
And so, like, the second thing that came up was there was a policy paper from 2020 that Edmonton put out about this, and I only skimmed it. Like, I didn't read this whole thing. It was quite long, and it was about their entire property tax structure. and they were like contemplating putting these fees on. And there was like a section here I wanted to read because I found it interesting as like a thing to watch out for as we craft. You know, if something comes out of this and we do get a property tax classification for surface lots, this is what the Edmonton city admin was, raising an alarm about. On first blush, this may seem to allow increasing tax rates on underutilized vacant lots in the downtown core. A typical example is surface-level parking lots. However, because the term vacant is undefined within the legislation, they're talking about the provincial legislation, it can also be read in opposition to improved. In other words, only those lots without any improvements can be considered vacant. Therefore, it is important to consider the question of what constitutes an improvement. For example, if gravel, asphalt, fencing, or even a booth can meet the definition of an improvement, the property can no longer be classed as vacant. Which I was like, oh man, that's like a wild like loophole that they were like anticipating, that we will say we're taxing vacant land.
Right.
Property owner will put a booth on and say, I'm not vacant anymore. I'm going to take you to court if you try to charge me a higher tax rate. So...
yeah, these are important questions around, if we want this to lead to a shift in land use, then how do we craft this in a way that we can avoid that kind of scenario where we're not really getting what we want and it doesn't kind of create a different type of system.
Yeah. So I think the thing that's going to happen next is this is going to wind up at council. And we know that we have, once again, we have like a variety of viewpoints, let's say, on council. I know that they've been talking about how civil they're all going to be, but we don't know how these people are going to break down in terms of their feelings about parking. And we know that with the last council, there were a couple of councillors, 3 councillors, in fact, who were like very adamant that we had to protect our parking lots. Assuming that there will be some, and I can guess some councillors on this new council who feel the same way about parking, how do you think that how do we convince people? Because in this city, parking is kind of sacred, right? And the idea of not being able to park right where you're supposed to get out and just walk into the building is kind of alien. How do we sort of shift the thinking on that? Do you have any ideas?
It's a hard one, I think, because it does tend to, the design of our city has encouraged that type of culture of movement, right? Yeah. And so what I would say is that when we're at a point where I think we have 430 people that are still living in the downtown, I think we have hit crisis mode at this point, right? We're continuing to lose people that want to live there, and downtowns are a core kind of element of cities. This is typically where tourists are going to come in. It's typically where you bring visitors to show them around. And I think that we really need to kind of rethink the way that we view the emphasis that we have or the prioritization that we have on vehicles. In most other cities, it's very common to park and walk if you're able to, right, to wherever you're kind of needing to go. We have an incredible amount of parking in the downtown. I'm not worried at all about a loss of some shifting transformations that might happen. And I think that would be, we need to start moving some of these spaces out of their function as parking lots to see what else is possible. And I think once we see that, there's a need to kind of move forward without everything being lined up potentially, and then everything else starts to fall into place. The other thing that comes out of this motion that I'm really interested in is the idea of these nuisance properties as well. So if I'm looking to Edmonton, which is I think what was inspiring Councillor Stevens to look at this, they have something called the Problem Property Initiative. Mm-hmm. And they basically look at I think it's mostly on the residential side there, where properties might have, be boarded up. They have a higher incidence of fires. There's more criminal activity that might take place in them. So they have a high demand on services, right. Like protective services coming in. And so they're trying to also create a different kind of subclass to shift how those spaces are being taxed as well. And so that's what Edmonton has done, is they've basically said, if we tag you as one of these problem properties, then you're going to pay 3 times the taxes. Yeah. And it again tries to rebalance things. And I mean, a boarded up property that might end up going on fire, that might create really unsafe housing conditions for people, isn't the type of place that we want in our neighborhoods, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that part of that motion is also to kind of, it's about parking lots and about shifting their function, and it's also about thinking around the types of residential spaces that we might have, and how we can bring them into a different type of use and maybe make them safer for everybody. Yeah.
And one thing that I think I'm a little bit concerned that councillors are going to look at this and they'll see the derelict property side of Stevens's motion and look at it and go, oh, well, I can get behind that. I can get behind cleaning up all those boarded up buildings, but they will look at a parking lot and say this is a useful property and not see these two things as linked, right? Whereas I think they're kind of the same thing.
I do too. I think they're linked. So I think both of them are doing, they're both running against the type of intensification that we're needing to have happen. They're both limiting the potential, limiting the sense of place, all of those things are happening on both of those elements. If you see a house that's boarded up, that's, deemed to be unsafe, it's in my head the same as seeing a surface parking lot where nobody's going to be looking at that and feeling particularly inspired, right? It's still kind of not getting our city to the point, to the place that we want it to be at. Yeah.
And they're both using up services and using up city resources while providing very small benefit.
Yes.
And when the sun goes down, they kind of have the same impact on a community, right? A lot of boarded up houses, it just makes your community feel not safe and sketchy. And, I think people who don't go downtown or go through, or, they don't leave their house at night won't notice how all those parking lots downtown at night, it just gives this air of dereliction to our downtown and doesn't make it feel like a safe place that you can hang out in. Because there's no people there, right?
No, there's no people. And the fact that our mall closes so early, I mean, these are really big indicators that there's a problem and that we need to address that in a different kind of way than we have up to this point. I've said this before, but we're really good at creating policies and plans that are really amazing. And when it comes to putting them into practice or putting them into action, we kind of just fall flat sometimes. So we have these amazing plans. Let's start to figure out ways to put them into practice. This is a motion that does that, I think.
Yeah. Unfortunately, though, it's one of those situations where, technically, it's only asking for a report, right? Where it's headed, what it's hoping to achieve down the line. But, and I've seen so many times at council that a councillor will bring forward just an idea for something progressive. The example that I bring up on Twitter all the time is a long time ago, I think it was Sean Fraser when he was the councillor in Ward 3, he brought forward a motion to investigate pegging parking fees downtown to transit fees so that transit would always be cheaper than it is to park. And it was just asking for a report to see if this was feasible and what a structure would look like. And it got killed, and council debated it as though he was trying to pass it that day, and if they said yes to it, it was going to be law by tomorrow, right? So I'm very worried, especially with newbie counselors, that they're going to make that same mistake and look at this as a threat and not an opportunity to learn something.
Yeah, and I would say to those new counselors to look to Edmonton. I mean, Edmonton is it's a really good example of what this looks like in practice. They've had amazing success with it. North Battleford is working on this type of, they've made some changes in 2023 that seem to also try to target nuisance properties, like certainly on that front. So like there's examples of this, and I think the Edmonton case is now inspiring cities across the country to start looking at this and think, how can we actually make our city safer, and how can we make it, like, how can we intensify it if we've got these problems in certain areas of just a lack of intensity and investment?
And it's also like, we know that the two areas that really, really, really need work are North Central and downtown. And this addresses the issues in North Central about like properties that aren't being kept up to standard, or being, they burn and they're just left. And it deals with like downtown. I think most councillors have made, mouth noises towards this, if not, come out fully in support of revitalizing these two neighborhoods. So I hope that will be ultimately convincing. Yeah. But who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to predict sometimes how these things are going to be read, but I hope that this one makes it to the report and we get to see what that looks like and get to kind of imagine what that would look like in practice. Yeah.
It's also hard because these are the kinds of motions, like I typically don't, if council is doing something that is cool, like I wouldn't be inspired, like sometimes we don't even cover that stuff on the show, because it doesn't make my blood boil. I'm like, okay, good, council's doing good. So I won't raise any alarm bells, because why? Everything is good. But then it gets to council, and then it goes to crap because council starts to meddle with it or vote it down. And so stuff like this that you look at and go, good, way to go. Like, people need to understand that these are also things, like, you just got to hammer councillors constantly on this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's hard because it's something from the previous council as well, right? And I hope, though, that this council sees that this isn't just like something that happened in an isolated kind of window, but this is something that is connected to the underutilized land study that came out, connected to the OCP, connected to the downtown plan, connected to energy and sustainability. This is connected to transportation master plan. Like, all of these things are really what this is about. So it's not coming out of left field. Like, this is a continuity of a lot of the decisions that have been made, a lot of the plans. So I'm hoping that they see that as that continuous kind of frame.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting point, how this is like the capstone on like a decade of work.
Absolutely.
In the city.
Yeah.
And also like 8 years of Councillor Stevens on council. Like,
yes.
So anyways, we have to go to innovative revenue tools here. But you'll be back so that we can talk about the second item?
Yes.
And other stuff? Awesome. Okay, here we go. And we're back from Innovative Revenue Tools. This is the Queen City Improvement Bureau, and we're here tonight with Dr. Vanessa Matthews from the University of Regina, a geography program. Department. Yeah, sorry. Hey, there was, if you're not listening to this on the radio, you might have missed that there was an ad about a campaign by the National Community and Campus Radio Association. And it's about lobbying and like advocating for national funding for community radio, federal funding for community radio. This is something that a lot of countries do, Australia, I believe, is one. Yeah, Australia. They have twice as many community radio stations than Canada, and they have even though they have 2/3 our population, but that's because they kick in like $20 million a year to the community radio sector, which for Canada's community radio sector, like half that would be transformational. It would be unbelievably good. So I support this initiative. I support community radio. Like, having strong local community media is more important now than it has ever been in my lifetime. And CJTR is an awesome station that I love. So if you feel similarly to me, go to www.mycri.ca, read up on what the association is trying to accomplish for community radio in Canada. And if you feel similarly and you want to get support, they've got like some steps that you can go through to like write your MP and let them know how you feel. So thanks everybody. Thanks for your support for CJTR and for the Queen City Improvement Bureau. But what we're actually talking about today is City Council. So, Vanessa, The second item that is coming up, this again is a leftover item from the last council. And this one is called a pilot project for fare-free transit to a high school in Regina. So the Be It resolves on that. It would be a recommendation to come up with a pilot project so that, like it says in the title, provide fare-free transit to a selected high school in Regina, pick one that demonstrates a need for this service, and ensure that the selected school is located along a transit route. And then they would want to get a preliminary report back, they say by Q1 2025, which we are in now, so I think it'll have to be like later. And hopefully this will be the first step towards fare-free transit for all high school students. We currently have free transit up till a kid's 13, but from 14 till 18 while they're still in school, they no longer have it, and a lot of kids have to pay for their own transit. This motion is different from the last one. It was brought forward by Councillors Zakidniak, Stadnichuk, and Stevens, and Zakidniak is actually still on council. And this was pushed by the Better Bus youth group a few years ago, and they tried to get this. The first go-round, we got up to 13, thanks to their efforts.
Absolutely. And
now this is coming forward. So where do you stand? I think I can guess on free transit.
Yes. Yes, yeah. And yes, let's just do this. Yeah. This is a really important one again. I think that there's been so much success with the under 13. Yeah. So we've had increased users. We've seen an uptake of families using this service with a paying adult. So we've had more revenue coming in from it, I think, than people initially expected or anticipated. Every time that I ride the bus, I see lots of kids on there, and it's wonderful to see because these are kids that are going to get used to riding buses as part of how they move through a city. And that's incredible, I think. And so when we look at that category of 13 to 18, we've got high school students that are needing to get to school, that sometimes don't live super close to where they're going to school, because of the boundaries or because of the areas and all of these different elements. And so when the weather gets cold, you see a reduction sometimes in the attendance for some kids who can't walk as far and can't afford to use the bus. And so, the school attendance part of it, I think, is really important. If we want to be an inclusive city, if we want to be an accessible city, these are things that we should just be automatically providing. When we think about the fact that a lot of high school students have part-time jobs, this is a way for them to be able to move around the city. They participate in recreational things, and this is a safe way for them to do that. So I think when you think about that grouping and you think, how can we create a generation of young people who recognize the importance of the bus, who are dependent on the bus, and we want to kind of meet them where they're at. This is just a great start to that. So the pilot, yes, and let's hope that after that pilot that we can extend this to everybody under the age of 18. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we heard when the Better Bus youth kids were coming into council and giving their presentations, and they came so many times, and it would be like a swath of kids from the ages of like 15 up to 18 who were coming to council, sitting through like grueling budget meetings to make their presentations about this, but they were passionate about it. And one of the things they talked about is the instances that they've seen at their high schools of kids. Typically, a lot of the kids in Better Bus Youth were newcomers to Canada, as a matter of fact. And so they saw a lot of like newcomers who did not have like high income families, didn't have access to a car, Indigenous families who this extra distance to get to high school, it became a real impediment in the winter where kids would just stop going. Yeah. And they had no way to get there, and they didn't even have enough money for bus fare. Because we forget that, bus fare is actually pretty expensive in Regina, especially if you do a round trip. Yep. Right? So, with we do have, if you do your round trip within 90 minutes is it, right? You can get your ride home for free. But if you're going to school spending 6 hours, you have to pay to get home.
So, I'm with you. It's just a no-brainer that this is something that we should be doing. I hear a lot of transit activists online saying things like, well, actually what helps a transit system is better frequency for buses, which I agree with, and free rides doesn't really help. Like, free transit doesn't help. A transit system, it starves it of revenue without actually increasing ridership very much. Excuse me. But I think this is kind of an equity issue, especially in Regina.
I think it is an equity issue. I think that, one of the other points I would make is that we continue to subsidize private vehicle use.
Right. Yeah.
In most cities in North America. Like, we are subsidizing parking, we are subsidizing roads, their maintenance, their widenings, everything. Like, every bit of that is subsidized, right? And so, I think when we're looking at the bus system, this is something that should be much more heavily subsidized than it currently is. It's, I know the point that people would make is, we mostly move through the city by private vehicle. So I think the last census we were at like 90% of trips are by private vehicle. Public transit was 3.6%. So just to kind of give us a ballpark, the problem does come up that frequency is an issue. But if you can demonstrate that it's being used, then I think the case can be made a little bit better as well. That we need to have more frequency. I think with frequency, it is something that if people are dependent on public transit, that's the frequency issue might not be as important in terms of what that decision is that they're making. But if people are looking at making a shift from private vehicle into public transit, frequency is the number one issue that comes up. And, there's like a website called like humantransit.org, and they make the connection that if you're thinking about this, you can kind of imagine being in a single family home where you are dependent on your car and you have a gate at the end of your driveway, and the gate only opens once on the hour. Right? It doesn't matter what the congestion would be. It doesn't matter like how crappy your drive to work is. That's all that it becomes is like, when is that gate going to open? Right? And that becomes all the planning. So, part of this is that we want people to use public transit, and we want to make it so that it's an easy decision. Not that you're going to be waiting for an hour and you're not sure exactly when things are going to come, but you want to know that there's many buses that are coming for you and you can have your choice, and that improves it. And when we can get younger people into that system, and when they get used to that behavior, it tends to create lifelong trends and behaviors. And so we know that from the research. And so doing this also then helps to set us up with, we've got increased density along transit routes that are coming forward, that have kind of happened, and we're waiting for that density to arrive, right? We've made all those changes. We know that we need to shift into more renewable forms of movement if we want to hit our goals by 2050. And so this just makes perfect sense. So yes, frequency is something, but ridership is a whole other part of this, I think.
Absolutely. And we've done a pilot in a way with this already in the form of the U-Pass, where when that was instituted, we went from, back up. When Harbor Landing was built, there was going to be no transit there because the transit department came forward and said, look, we don't have the capacity to provide a bus to Harbor Landing. The mayor of the day, Fiacco, in his wisdom, just came in and said, you have to make a bus. You have to put a bus out there. Now, the argument was that the Walmart was there and they needed it for their employees. But what happened was city staff, very quickly built transit into Harbor Landing. And a lot of newcomers are out there. A lot of young families are out there who have now grown up and have kids going to university. And that bus that comes out of Harbor Landing and goes to the university, since the advent of the U-Pass that every university student has, that is the most ridden, it's the most used bus in our entire fleet. It is frequently over capacity. It is, and, proves that we need more buses out there.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it goes to show that, when you have that service, that not only then are we subsidizing, a different form of public transit that's more sustainable and more, meeting the goals that we already have. But we're also taking cars off the road, which makes it better for everybody. And so it is a system that it's a win-win to me. That it's less congestion. Then it's less need for road widening and all the other things that we end up spending so much money on.
Yeah. One thing I did hear when this was first suggested was, we won't be able to handle the number of riders. We're going to have to get more buses. And I'm just like, boo-hoo.
It's a great problem to have, isn't it?
It's exactly what we want.
Yes.
An overused transit system, sign me up.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I hope this passes. I suspect it actually. Well, again, it is just an information request, although, it will actually involve kids getting on buses and having like a free bus pass. So it's more than just like an info report. It's like an actual experiment. But this time we've got Councillor Zakidniak on council to advocate for it. And she's like one of the only 11 of our 11 members of council who has any council experience. She's a bit of a tiger when it comes to like getting stuff through. So I think she will be a strong advocate for this. So I think this even has like a better chance of going through than the other. Yeah,
and I think, the interesting element is that they're both related in so many ways as well. It's like, we're talking about parking, we're talking about the subsidies that we create for parking, and then we're also talking about creating a different system for that. So, in some respects in my head, these are both like kind of part of the same set of principles that should be guiding the future of our city.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be crazy if these things go through. Like I think that would make for their first council meeting to be incredibly successful.
Yes,
in my mind, anyway.
Me too.
Yeah. But I'll be curious to see what the arguments against are, if there are any. Mm-hmm. So, all right, we are on 91.3 FM CJTR Regina Community Radio. We're the Queen City Improvement Bureau. I'm speaking with Professor Vanessa Matthews from the University of Regina about what's coming up at City Council. And we just got through that, and we actually have like a new thing that just dropped today, like just this afternoon. We've been waiting on this since 2023 is when this iteration of the project started. And it's the Scarth Street Pedestrian Mall plan. And I'm just going to spoil it. The recommendation from city staff is keep it a pedestrian mall. Thoughts, Vanessa?
Yeah, I was very happy. This felt like I was like opening a present.
Oh, really?
I was awesome. So excited when it like dropped and I was able to kind of see, and I was had a lot of anticipation about what it would look like, and so this is just I would encourage everybody that's listening to go on to the Be Heard site and to follow the city on Facebook and all the other social media things, just so you can see what it looks like, and I think they're still taking comments until early February, it looks like, but I think that there was a huge amount of people that were wanting to keep this as a pedestrian-only street, and that is what the recommendation now is. This is incredibly exciting, I think, because I love the Scarth Street Mall, and I think it's wonderful. And when we have this kind of support by the public, it just makes me think that we can do more than this, right? We can think about having other parts of the downtown pedestrian potentially in the future, which also kind of connects with the other kinds of conversations that we've been having today.
Yeah. So, I guess it wouldn't be a Queen City Improvement Bureau without me being grumpy about something. And I'm grumpy about this. And I'm grumpy in a few different ways. Now, on the one hand, I kind of know some of the people. We had one of the people who's, behind the scenes been working on this at City Hall on the show. And so I know that city staff have been working hard on this and have been listening to the public. And I know that their recommendation is well informed by research and looking at best case scenarios in other cities and what they can do and what they can accomplish here. And you've been advocating for the pedestrian mall on Scarth Street, and everybody I run into wants it to stay a pedestrian mall. People are shouting at me in my mentions constantly that it has to stay a pedestrian mall. But So I get it, and I will admit that I'm wrong if it turns out I'm wrong. But I don't know, like, the plan that they're bringing forward isn't like a brand new mall, right? It's not a new idea. It's basically just a renovation, a refurbishment, an upgrade, an evolution from, like, basic Pokemon to a regular Pokemon. And in terms of the plan, and I don't know how they think that by doing the same thing again, they're going to get a different outcome in the long term. And we talked about this before. The book Walkable Cities talks about how pedestrian malls in North America are moribund and failing because they don't have the density of uses, the residential density that cities in Europe have. And their pedestrian malls are wonderlands. They're amazing, right? Like, every small town has one, and they are the focus of constant activity, and it's amazing. But we don't have anybody living downtown practically. Our businesses are closing. And it's not because we don't have enough pedestrian space. It's because we don't have enough people living downtown to go to those businesses. So I really feel like, and I've said this before, that this feels like putting the cart before the horse, that we're putting in, like, a recreation space for people that don't exist. And that is my concern. And one of the things they talk about in the press release for this is that it's going to have, activation. But we've already got, so our downtown business improvement district is already in charge of activating the plaza. Now they're going to have to, and they are already activating FW Hill Mall. So there's going to be a renewed emphasis because there's going to be pressure for this to succeed, for them to activate that as well. So that's two spaces. They're activating the park, and they're also introducing this place called Square on the bones of the Gordon Block, which is also going to be like an activation space. So we're going to have like 4 activation areas within 2 blocks. And I don't know how they're going to pull this off. I don't know how they're going to, like, organize and brand these spaces, because they can't all be for, yoga outdoors, right? Like, we can't, there's not enough people doing yoga in the city to fill up all that acreage. So, like, they're going to have to, like, think about what is FW Hill Mall good for, what is Square good for, what is the plaza good for. I also think we have to look at the plaza, because it is a mess. Like, it was supposed to be a Woonerf, right? Like, it was supposed to be a space, a shared space with cars and pedestrians, where cars drove slowly east to west and west to east, right? Like, it was supposed to be a 2-way street with slow, under 30, under 20 kilometer per hour car traffic and people wandering around. That was just changed after the plaza was built at the last minute before it opened. And now we have this ridiculous cars go into the plaza, then go north, and then they do a U-turn on, what is it, Lawrence Street? No, Cornwall Street, and then they turn around and they come back out and go out to the west. It's nonsense. And we don't even have the farmers market downtown anymore. Like, I don't know what we're going to do with all this space, this temporary and pedestrian space. So I hope they have a plan. We're going to find out when this comes to council in April. So, and, like I say, you're smart, they're smart. Everybody who's telling me this is a good idea is smart, but I have got so many misgivings about it.
Yeah, I think the activation is key, right? Yeah. And I think that's going to be really what shapes this, and I think that it can be wildly successful, especially if we're thinking about the other aspects that we're talking about today, especially if we're talking about getting more people living downtown, which is like the need that we have in the city. Then, we'll have more people who will be able to use these spaces, and then that will draw in people from outside. And I hope that in like 5 to 10 years, these are just like awesome spaces, and everybody's looking at them as though these are these magical things that allowed for that activation of the entire downtown to happen through their presence.
You know what would really help? If all the people who've been complaining online and filling up my mentions with like really angry comments about these jerks downtown who want to put cars on the pedestrian mall and are screaming about how it has to stay a pedestrian space, if those people would actually go downtown more than a couple of times a year, that would be transformative.
Yes.
Because there were so many of them.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, people have to, if we want these spaces, we have to use these spaces. And that's just how it has to happen in a city, in any city, right? And if we use them and we love them, then they stay and they grow and they become amazing. And that's the same with transit. It's the same with, all of these different aspects. So I'm not worried about the cart being before the horse. I think a lot of these things require us to kind of be able to have that vision, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, I'm going to try and cling to hope. You've given me some. Thank you. But so a couple of things on top of this. Like, first of all, I just want to I hope people are like recognize the amount of pressure that was put on city administration and the amount of accusation, like the number of accusations that they just don't care, they're not listening, the fix is in, they're all corrupt. And yet the result has come out that they listened to the public and gave everybody exactly what they wanted. And I think, we don't know, it still has to go to council, and this is where the meddling happens. So we'll see if, council is willing to, this new council is willing to listen to their administration. The other thing that I noticed, though, about this plan that I'm curious about, and this is like an honest question, this isn't me trying to do a gotcha. There are a lot of locations on this new plaza for patios for businesses. And so the question that I'm going to have for administration down the line is, what are they going to be doing to facilitate businesses getting their patios out there? Because there's a whole process to making a patio legal. You have to get you have to jump through a bunch of hoops with the city, and then if you're doing beer service or bar service on a patio, you have to get through SLGA. I remember what a hassle it was for O'Hanlon's to get their patio, which is now, considering how much money they had to spend to get it up to satisfy city admin and the province, it's now one of, if not the most important social places downtown, right? It's a crucial third space in our city, right? But it was like a titanic effort to get that through. So I'm hoping that what's going to come out of this is that city administration has put some thought into how to, reduce the paperwork, the red tape for the businesses that are on the Scar Street Mall. So it's just basically like an easy process to go from opening a restaurant to having a patio, because patios are crucial to a space like this working.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a great kind of thing to hopefully be part of that, if we're putting this forward, then we need to kind of think about those next steps. Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, I also I hope one of the things that these pictures will never include is homeless people. And they have some photos of what, some artist renderings of what they think this space is going to look like, and it's very bougie, right? And people who are panhandling, people who have nowhere to live and nowhere to sleep, they're valid users of downtown. They would be valid users of this plaza as well. So I know these people are thinking about this, but I will be curious to hear what thought is being put into how do we accommodate the needs of downtown's homeless in a space like this pedestrian mall. Absolutely, because I think when we're talking about third spaces, or we're thinking about public space in general, then that includes everybody, right? And so we need to kind of move forward with a plan that's inclusive and accessible and all of those things, and so that does include everybody and everyone in a way that creates safety and well-being and all of those provisions.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was awesome. This was a wonderful discussion. Is there anything else coming up with this new council or in the new... is there anything that you're looking forward to, hoping for?
I'm hoping that these things that we've talked about, these are the first steps for me. It's just I'm wanting to see movement on these, and I hope that this council is going to bring us closer to becoming a more livable city, right? And hitting some of the goals that most people have had for decades.
Yeah. I think one thing that I'm hoping for, and it comes out of this stuff that we've just been talking about today, is, and I hate to admit this, but I think we might have to crack open the downtown neighborhood plan. It was passed in 2009.
Yep.
It's been mostly sitting on a shelf. Like, I know that it's guided some, like, planning stuff that goes on behind the scenes, but a lot of the promises that it made and a lot of the recommendations that it made have not happened, right? Like, stuff that was supposed to be implemented 10 years ago has just not happened. And that's too bad. So, and I do feel like, especially with things like the Catalyst Project, which seemed to just ignore that we had a downtown plan, like, I'm hoping that I think the downtown plan is wonderful. I think it's a great plan. And so I hope that if they open it up, it's in the spirit of coming up with, like, an implementation plan, finally.
Yes.
And I think these are steps, right? Like, these would be steps towards that. So that's my fingers crossed.
I like that. The implementation plan.
Finally.
It's great. Finally. Right.
All right. Well, thanks for coming in. But on that note, we actually have to move to adjourn this meeting. Oh, look at that. I didn't write down the outro. You're listening, and I'm messing everything up. You're listening to the Queen City Improvement Bureau on 91.3 FM CJTR Regina Community Radio. I've been your host, Paul Duchesne. Aidan Morgan is off speaking to the crows. He'll be back next week, hopefully, assuming he's not just croaking anymore. Our guest tonight was Vanessa Matthews from the University of Regina's Geography Department. Geography Department. In my head, I was saying, don't say geology, and then it came out my mouth. So coming up next, we have the Record Room and then music all on through the night. Unless you're listening to this on Monday, in which case it should be Darbar and The Basement, which you should totally listen to because it's awesome. You can find us online at queencityib.com, where we have our entire back catalog of episodes going back 9 years now of city council awesomeness. There's also a blog in there. You remember those? We have one that we update occasionally, and like other just like sound files and stuff that you can get at. We have a YouTube page where we put city council clips, and I'm also posting our podcast version of this, what you've just listened to YouTube. So you can find that at youtube.com/PD City Hall. Aidan is on Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky. I will be live tweeting the executive committee meeting and the city council meeting coming up, maybe even the planning committee on Blue Sky now. So you can find me on Blue Sky as at PD City Hall. I think that's it. Keep on improving, Regina.